Hello, everyone. This is so good to be back in person again. It feels like we're back in business. It's awesome, especially for an author as great as Neema. It's such an honor. So, hello, and welcome to Brookline Booksmith for this very special event featuring Neema Avashia, here to talk to us about her book, Another Appalachia, Coming Up Queer and Indian in a Mountain Place. My name is Adam, and I'm a bookseller here at Brookline Booksmith. If you're familiar with our store, welcome back. If this is your first time here, welcome. It's so good to have you part of our community this evening, and we so thank you for supporting an independent bookstore through your purchases, even though we don't have any books right now, and your attendance, and for supporting Neema. The Booksmith has been here in Coolidge Corner for 60 years now, as of last year, and that is because of the support and the love of folks like you. So, really, from the bottom of our hearts, thank you so much. Just a couple of nuts and bolts before we get to the fun stuff. For the duration of the event, thank you for keeping your phones on silent and your masks on. We appreciate this from everyone. As you know, I deeply regret to inform everybody that due to the ever-annoying global supply chain issues, we do not have Neema's book right now. We tried as hard as we could. I'm so sorry. If you pre-ordered a book, you will definitely still be getting it. And if you still want to purchase a book, that is definitely going to be possible. We're working on setting up another day where we can do a live signing. And so everybody's pre-ordered books will definitely get signed, and everybody will have the opportunity to purchase Neema's wonderful book. And honestly, thank you, Neema, for bearing with us. You're the best. And finally, we will have a Q&A, so please hold your questions in your head and get them ready. But it is such a pleasure to have this amazing person here with us tonight to talk about her book, Another Appalachia. Another Appalachia examines both the roots and the resonance of Avashia's identity as a queer Desi Appalachian woman, while encouraging readers to envision more complex versions of both Appalachia and the nation as a whole. With lyric and narrative explorations of foodways, religion, sports, standards of beauty, social media, gun culture, and more, this book mixes nostalgia and humor, sadness and sweetness, personal reflection, and universal questions. Neema was born and raised in southern West Virginia to parents who immigrated to the United States, but has lived in Boston and taught in the Boston Public Schools since 2003. Her essays have appeared in the Bitter Southerner, Catapult, Kenyon Review Online, and elsewhere. So, ladies and gentlemen, without further delay, please give a round of applause for our special guest this evening.
For being here, everybody. This is kind of amazing. I've been up there a lot of times, and so it's a little bit weird to be up here, but also a pretty powerful feeling. I just want to thank you all for coming out, and thank you for being understanding about the fact that there's currently a courier driving from Chicago to Boston. They left at noon today, and I don't think they're going to make it, but you will get your books. I got really good at doing pandemic drop-offs, as many teachers in this room did, so we know how to make the routes, we know how to get the books to people, we're going to get them to you, don't worry. Most readings nowadays happen with two people, where there's a reader and there's a conversant, and in the case of this reading, I decided not to do that, because this is my home bookstore. And I really wanted to be in the space with you and not distract from that. So we're going to try a little experiment, which is going to be, we're going to do something together that's a little bit different for readings, but we're going to try it and see how it goes. And I have merch, I have all kinds of things that we'll use to get us through this. So we're just going to start with a quick picture. And I'm wondering if anyone's willing to share just what do you notice when you look at this image, and what do you wonder when you look at this image? And there's a lot of teachers in this room, so I know that there are people who can share their thinking and will not leave me hanging in this moment. What do you notice? What do you wonder? Oh, yeah, in the back. Go ahead, Jess.
Oh, I was waving at Sunny.
Oh. Go ahead, Nick.
I noticed there are some children sitting down, and I wonder if the people standing up are the teachers.
Great. Thanks, Nick. Way to model for all of us. Another teacher, in case you were wondering. Any other notices or wonders? Yeah, Adrienne, go ahead.
Okay, so I noticed that I assume it's you, but there is one brown person in this class, and I wonder what your classmates thought about you.
It's a great
or
question.
that person. I'm sorry.
Yes, no, fair. Thank you. Any other notices or wonderings? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, also that person standing, it just seems much taller and larger than everyone else around them.
Fair, definitely. Significantly taller, yep. Any other notices and wonders? Yeah, go ahead, more.
I noticed the class size and how small it is.
It's so small. I know, I wish my class was that size. I brought this up. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry. I'm wondering about the time period. I'm noticing like some super short shorts and some jean skirts and some bangs, some overalls. So that's making me think about the time period.
Also, the panel faux wood
There you go.
is a clue. Orange carpet. Yeah, yeah. I wanted to start with this image because, like, this is my preschool picture. And that's me in the front row. And kind of like Adrian was asking, like, I too wonder what my classmates thought of me. And some of them let me know. And I also had a lot of thoughts and experiences that I wanted to share. And so that's a big part of why I wrote this book, because this experience that I had is not unique. There are immigrants in rural America, there are black folks in rural America, there are queer folks in rural America, and their stories don't get told enough. And so a big motivation for me in writing this book was to make space and make visibility for the stories of people like me who still live there. And I don't, but I think the stories I had to tell can kind of shed a little bit of light on what otherwise I think a lot of people in New England assume is a very homogenous place. Appalachia is a lot less homogenous than you think it is. And if you read a book that was this bestseller and was on the shelves up here called Hillbilly Elegy, you wouldn't know that. Because that book doesn't tell stories of people like me and my family. So that's a lot of what went into this book. So I'm excited to read you today, but I feel a little bit isolated because I think there are a couple of other Appalachian folks in the room. Let's just see. How many people are here from Appalachia? Hey! There's like, yes! Amazing. I think there's 5 of us. That's like probably a record. Usually that's our house for dinner. There are 5 Appalachian people there, and that's about it. So, you all maybe have a head start with some of these questions, but we're just going to warm up with a little bit to see what do you know about West Virginia? And I have some amazing computer stickers with quotes from the book on it. So let's see, does anybody know the state capital of West Virginia? Oh, yeah, Carolyn, go for it.
Charleston.
Yeah, there you go. Awesome. What about the most famous song written about West Virginia? Oh, in the back there, Amy's got it. There you go, Take Me Home Country Road. And what president was responsible for the creation of West Virginia? Ooh, history teachers, history teachers. Yeah, Sonny, did you say that? Wait, who was that? Jeremy said it. Jeremy, that's cheating. I feel like because Jeremy's from Virginia, which is still salty that happened. 2 famous authors from the state of West Virginia. I don't count. I'm not famous. Ooh. Tough. All right. Well, we'll have some required reading for you at the end of this then. Actually, there's a bunch of authors in the book who you'll learn about them. What about Jeremy, you're going to get this one too. All right. One historical labor struggle that happened in West Virginia is very famous. Calvin, I see you. There is a really great, well, that's another one, but yes, there is. Matewan definitely counts, and there's another one. Blair Mountain, you got it. Awesome. Somebody back there. All right, so warmed up a little bit. There'll be some trivia a little bit later that's a little harder. We'll see how you do with that. But I'm going to start by reading you an essay from this collection. It's my favorite essay in the collection. It's real quick and short, but I'll just give you a little bit of a sense of what this book's about. And it's called Be Like Wilt. And Wilt is Wilt Chamberlain. I stand on the foul line at the Cross Lanes Methodist Church gym. I am 9. The only girl playing on an all-boys basketball team. The only brown kid on a team of white boys. My puny arms, thick glasses, and long oiled braids set me even further apart from their wiry, muscular bodies and cropped blonde haircuts. Why has Carl Bradford chosen me for his team? I wonder about this. His sons are 2 of the quickest, highest-scoring players in our local league. In 1988, in Cross Lanes, West Virginia, there is no designated league for girls. And when I try out one Saturday in October, there are only 2 other girls in the gym with close to 80 boys. Tryouts in this pre-hyper-competitive era involve dribbling up and down the court and shooting 2 layups and a couple of foul shots. Every kid is guaranteed a space on a team. The question is simply which coach will choose to take them on. Each girl is selected for a different team. Some teams have no girls. Mr. Bradford doesn't have to pick me, but he does anyway. In doing so, he also takes on the responsibility of chauffeuring me to and from practices and games. Basketball is not a sport my immigrant parents understand, and the parental time commitment it requires is not something their lives leave space for. By opting to play, I take a step further away from my nuclear family and closer to my West Virginia community. Still, my Indian genetics make me short, weak, and terribly uncoordinated. When I shoot the ball overhand, it falls short of the basket by several feet. When I play defense, my teammates say I look like a praying mantis, my hands weaving in front of me instead of out to the sides. I love the game, but I'm about as far from a natural talent as my parents' hometown in India is from this gym at the end of Frontier Drive. One evening, Mr. Bradford proposes that I shoot the ball a different way. Not overhand, as I've been trying to, but underhand. Granny style, my teammates disparagingly call it. Some of the greatest basketball players of all time shot underhand, Neema, Mr. Bradford says. Wilt Chamberlain shot underhand. His blue eyes, magnified by round wire-rimmed glasses, probe mine. In my adult life, I have listened to entire podcasts about the accuracy of the granny shot, about how Wilt Chamberlain scored 100 points in the one game where he shot free throws underhand, and Rick Barry's career free throw percentage was a chart-topping 89.3 because he opted to do the same. But at age 9, I feel like this is yet another way in which I'm being set apart from my peers. Raised by fathers who were players of the game, taught to play at driveway hoops as soon as they could walk, they can shoot overhand. I cannot. How do you assimilate into the dominant culture when your own culture is so invisible to the majority? My small group of Indian peers and I answered this question in different ways. The only Indian boy at my elementary school, who all the other white kids think is either my brother or insist I should date, speaks with an exaggerated twang, drinks heavily through high school, and loudly votes Republican later on. Some of the Indian kids who live in the city of Charleston emulate their wealthy white classmates, picking up tennis or golf as entry points into American culture. As for me, I choose basketball. I play the sport constantly, watch it obsessively on the TV in our basement, and rock my satin, turquoise and purple Charlotte Hornets jacket daily. And not simply because I love the game. I do, but basketball is more than just a sport to me. It's my way into a world where I otherwise don't seem to belong. I blush hard at the suggestion to shoot underhand, dribble a basketball against the white linoleum flooring of the gym, and stare at the black curve of the key instead of making eye contact with Mr. Bradford. I know he's right, but I'm not sure I can find the courage to shoot granny style in a game where all my teammates and classmates from school will be watching. Much later in his career, Chamberlain explained why he only shot underhand for one season and referred to the less accurate overhand free throw afterwards. I felt silly, like a sissy shooting underhand, he said. I know I was wrong. I know some of the best foul shooters in history shot that way. I just couldn't do it. Even though I hadn't heard this explanation in 1988, I struggled with the same sentiment. Eventually, however, my desire to make a basket overwhelmed my fear of judgment. Game day comes, the point guard gets the ball into my hands, and I position the ball between my legs before hurling it upwards. Swish. It isn't a buzzer beater. It's not the game-winning shot. It's just 2 points scored midway through the third quarter in a regular season game. But the entire gym erupts in cheers, the crowd chanting my name. Someone even calls my mom from the payphone in the corner. I grow so dizzy with this temporary but overwhelming sense of belonging that I fail to register the final score. After the game, Mr. Bradford gives me his slow, sweet smile. See, Neema, it doesn't matter how you shoot the ball. It just matters that the ball goes in. Mr. Bradford drafts me for his team each of the next 3 years. At the end of my last season, he persuades all the coaches to jointly award me the league's Heart and Hustle Trophy, given not to the most talented player, but to the most dedicated team member. It remains to this day the award I cherish most. When I age out of his league, he recruits me as an assistant coach for his younger son's team. His red Jeep Cherokee is a fixture outside our house at least 3 days a week as he continues to drive me to and from practices and games. Each evening after practice, we drive over Goff Mountain. The headlights of the Jeep cast the only light on the dark and winding road that takes us past a pungent chemical landfill and through a dense stand of trees. Close your eyes now, he commands as we approach the summit of the mountain. In the back seat, the boys and I giggle and grin, close our eyes, take a deep breath. Mr. Bradford hits the gas, and we soar over the first hill, our stomachs dropping roller coaster style. The Jeep bounces hard on the concrete, then takes flight again as we hit the second decline. For this brief moment, we are Bo, Luke, and Daisy in the general lead. Our screams of delight replace the sounds of Dixie in this reimagined Dukes of Hazzard, and I am wildly, freely American in a way I can never recapture outside of Mr. Bradford's presence. All right, you ready for some trivia? Okay, so round one. She was one of America's preeminent feminist writers and thinkers. She taught at Stanford, Yale, and CUNY before finishing her career back home at Berea College. Oh, Anne got it. Anne, who is it? Bell Hooks, you got it. Bell Hooks, may she rest in peace, was born in Hopkinsville, Kentucky. Her birth name was Gloria Jean Watkins, and she famously wrote something that has influenced sort of everything about how I think about this book and maybe my life. She wrote that at the essence of queerness is the necessity to invent and create and find a place to speak and to thrive and to live. All right, second person. This rock and roll Hall of Famer was born in Slab Fork, West Virginia, and overcame a stutter to go on to sing hits like Grandma's Hands and Just the Two of Us. Oh, we have so many people who...
I saw Hannah Sanders.
Hannah, go.
I know the song. I can't think of his name. Go ahead.
Bill Withers.
Bill Withers, yeah. Adrian already has a shirt.
Actually, you
though.
can take my shirt.
Yeah. Adrian bought the shirt. All right, and last one, Bill Withers, yes, was born in Slab Fork. His dad was a miner. He was raised in Beckley, and he moved to LA after 9 years in the Navy, but he is a West Virginian, and a lot of people don't know that about him. All right, last one. Another Appalachia trivia round 3. She worked as a mathematician for NASA, calculating orbital mechanics to ensure safe shuttle takeoffs and landings, starting with the, I left out the ending, the Apollo mission. Wait, do you know? Well, yeah?
No, I'm trying to think. Ignore me.
Please, you want to do it? Katherine Johnson, you got it.
I saw that.
Katherine Johnson went to graduate school right beside my dad's chemical plant. My mom went to the same college, but the crazy thing to know is that I never learned about her in school. There was no statue to her on the campus at West Virginia State College. The first time I learned about her was when she was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 2015. So a lot of this history, I would say, I also have learned since leaving. So don't feel bad if you don't know it. We don't get to learn it at home enough either. And certainly not now, with lots of people trying to make laws about not learning about people of color. So, all right, thanks for engaging in my trivia. I'm going to read one more essay to you, and then we'll take some questions. This essay is called Our Armor. It's not as happy as the last one, I apologize. Wanted you to feel a mix. 1. My mother's morning preparations always took the same form. She emerged from the bathroom after her shower, the air around her perfumed by a heady mix of talcum powder and baby oil. Dressed in a blouse and petticoat, the softness of her belly just spilled over the tightness of the drawstring waist. From my perch on her bed, I watched her get ready for the day ahead, following her movements through her reflection in the mirror. First, she mercilessly attacked the knots in her waist-length hair with a plastic comb, then used her slender fingers to divide the hair into 3 equal sections, which she braided without looking, only pulling the braid over her shoulder when her arm could no longer reach far down enough for back. Next, she wrapped the sari around her body, pleating and draping 6 yards of silk with a tailor's precision. Last, she put on her ornaments, thin gold bangles that jangled solidly on her wrists, small gold hoop earrings, a black and gold pearl Mangalsutra around her neck, a black mascara janlo on her forehead. Ensemble complete, she stepped out of our home and into the wilds of small town West Virginia. In such a foreign context, she opted to own her foreignness rather than hide it on her walks to school, at her job as an accountant, during her service on the board of the local library, as the troop leader for the Girl Scouts. The chanlo was the marker of marriage for Indian women of my mother's generation. It has many names. Tilak and Bindi are 2 of the most common, but in Gujarati, chanlo is a preferred one. Placed between the eyebrows at the side of the 6th chakra, it's said to represent the 3rd eye and the notion of hidden wisdom. Indian women in India mark their heads with vermilion powder or with tiny stickers in a multitude of shapes, colors, and designs to match each of their saris. For my mother, none of those options were available. There was no Indian grocery store where she could purchase vermilion or sheets of Janmo stickers. So she did what immigrants in America always do to survive. She modified. Bought mascara from Rite Aid, perfected the art of drawing a tiny black circle on her forehead with a fuzzy, curvy brush. Never left the house unmarked. By midday, the Janmo would begin to crust, crumbled bits of mascara landing on her cheeks and chin. My mother carried her mascara in her purse. Even at the height of tax season, with its 16-hour workdays, at the first sign of crumble, she would take a moment to go to the bathroom, wash off the remains of the mascara, and reapply, determined to keep her third eye intact. I used to think my mother was an embarrassment. Her silky clothes and glittering jewelry contrasted so sharply with the hairspray-stiffened perms and acid-washed mom jeans of my classmates' mothers. Our brownness in a white world already marked us as other. Why did she need to heighten the distinction? In Jersey City around this time, white supremacists, self-proclaimed dot busters, chased Indian women down the street, beat them when they caught them. The way to stay safe, I thought, was to blend in. And my dazzling mother, dazzling in both her style and her personality, never blended into the bland linoleum and polyester environs of 1980s West Virginia. I shushed my mother when she spoke to me in Gujarati in public, its pitch and tone so different than that of English. Speak English, I would demand, refusing to acknowledge her if she wouldn't. Children can be so cruel, the saying goes, and I was living proof. I curse my cruelty now when I can't find the vocabulary in Gujarati to communicate complex ideas. Or when I wear a sari and my mother's stinging response is that I look weird because she can't reconcile my short hair with traditional clothing. I want to believe that my message of assimilation pushed so strongly on my mother was born of my need for safety, both my own and my mother's. But this safety came at tremendous cost. My mother's saris now gather dust in her closet, only worn on the most special of occasions. 2. Pamela Circle was never a flag-waving neighborhood in the 80s and 90s. My neighbors' yards did not boast flagpoles, their porches lacked flag holders. Flapping American flags were flown in schoolyards, not front yards. Flapping Confederate flags were flown in yards in other neighborhoods. I learned very early not to trespass through. But on my street, the main morning sounds were those of birds chirping and basketballs pounding on pavement, not red, white, and blue bunting flapping in the breeze. Until late September in 2001, that is, when my parents took a trip to Portland, Oregon. They sat in their rental car at a stoplight downtown when a group of white men approached, banged on the hood, and rocked the car. The men screamed epithets and curses and the favorite phrase of white supremacists everywhere, hurled at those of us who are not white. Go back to where you came from. The light changed. My father slammed the gas pedal, charging forward, unconcerned about whether he ran over anyone's feet in the process. Later that same fall, on a Greyhound bus in Logan, West Virginia, less than an hour from our home, white passengers tackled an older Indian man and pinned him to the floor. They viewed his frequent trips to the bathroom as suspicious, instead of being the result of a failing prostate. They only removed their knees from his back when police arrived to take him off the bus. For 25 years, precisely the same amount of time he had spent living in India, my father had worked to make West Virginia feel like home. And then, any glimmer of insider status he had gained in 2.5 decades evaporated between the hours of 8 a.m. and 9 a.m. on September 11, 2001. After their trip, my father promptly went to Castro Hardware and purchased a massive American flag decal emblazoned with the saying, "Proud to be an American." He taped it to our glass front door, leaving sticky residue marks of many crooked attempts before he felt satisfied that it was straight. Another flag got taped in the back windshield of his blue Toyota van. A third got placed in a holder on the porch. 640 miles away in Madison, Wisconsin, I compulsively went across the street every afternoon to check on the Punjabi Sikhs who ran the gas station, using them as a proxy for my parents. 4 days after 9/11, Balbir Singh Sodhi, a Punjabi man my father's age, was murdered at his gas station in Arizona by Frank Silverroque, a white supremacist who shouted, "I am a patriot, and I stand for America all the way," when arrested. Sodhi's brown skin and turban were all it took for him to be interpreted as a threat, as a terrorist, as someone whose murder was justified. I did not believe my father's flags would keep him safe, but I could not ask him to take them down. I struggled with his assertion of patriotism towards a country that had only shown me ambivalence regarding my existence, and simultaneously lived in fear of what might happen to my parents if the Confederate flag wavers of other neighborhoods found their way to our street. So profoundly apolitical and welcoming up to this point. My parents' professional lives as doctors and accountants may have buffered them from the worst of West Virginia's ugly racism before 9/11. I, on the other hand, felt its effects from the age of 6, when a chubby, rat-tailed kindergartner approached me in the schoolyard, slapped me across the face, and hit me with the ugliest of racial slurs, illustrating that in West Virginia there were only 2 categories that seemed to matter when it came to race: white and not white. And again, when fans of the opposing middle school basketball teams, Mr. Miyagi and Speedy Gonzalez and Where's Your Papoose, every time I walked onto the court, showering me with trash and epithets, nigger, every day during, and our teacher pretended not to hear him. Until 9/11, my parents didn't question their belonging in America. America provided them work, wealth, the opportunity to live a kind of life impossible to imagine in India, and to bring family members in India into a slowly growing middle class. Meanwhile, I, exposed to the ugliest manifestation of American ignorance, received continual reminders that I did not belong. If the flag could protect my parents from this venom, and from the thick, incapacitating doubt that such venom shuttles to the brain, I would not ask them to take it down. 3. I can't remember when I began to openly flaunt my West Virginia roots, to wear t-shirts emblazoned with images of West Virginia and the lyrics to Country Roads, to proudly share every historical and cultural factoid I have collected during my time living in the state and have continued to collect after leaving. I can, however, remember the first time a white man in West Virginia told me, "Go back to where you came from," at a gas station in Sissonville in the fall of 1995, in between chugs from his 40-ounce bottle of beer. And the second time on the side of the road in Nashville, Tennessee in the summer of 1996, screamed out a car window. And the third time at Ogilvy Park in Wheeling in the fall of 1998, where a leering cowboy held up his hand and said, "How?" mocking a Lakota greeting. He asked me what tribe I was from, and when I responded that I was not that kind of Indian, proceeded to spit hate in my face. And again, in the summer of 2019, when the newspaper headlines announced that our white male president scolded a group of brown and black congresswomen using that very same phrase. I hate the way my body responds to acts of racism. Where others are able to stay calm and unaffected or angrily fight back, I simply disintegrate. My eyes blur, my temples pound, and I catalog counter-arguments in my mind, but my dry mouth, the fear squeezing my chest cavity, prevents me from saying a word. I want, in those moments, to assert my Americanness, my West Virginianness, to pull out the birth certificate detailing my birth at Thomas Hospital in Charleston, West Virginia, in the heart of the Kanawha Valley. That muddy river valley, those green mountains, those smoking chemical stacks, they are where I come from. So much so that I'm writing this essay in a room in my house entirely dedicated to the state of West Virginia. The walls are decorated with a wedding ring quilt, a painting of the New River Gorge, and a map of West Virginia that dates back to the late 1880s. My light source is a lamp from the Blanco glassblowing factory in Milton, 20 minutes from where I grew up. I want to show my doubters that I am an expansive encyclopedia of knowledge about West Virginia, most of which I learned in my 8th grade West Virginia Studies course, or have memorized from the actual West Virginia Encyclopedia, my favorite coffee table book. Do you know your state bird and state animal? Mine are the cardinal and the black bear. Can you name every celebrity to come out of your home state? Chuck Yeager was born in Myra long before he flew his plane so fast that he broke the sound barrier. Jerry West was from Cheyenne, or Zeke from Cabin Creek, years before he made the NBA All-Star team 14 times. Walter Dean Myers was born in Martinsburg before he became a phenomenal writer for young adults. Henry Louis Gates and his brilliant brain spent their formative years in Kaiser. Randy Moss first played football in the backyards of Rand, and Lou Holtz did the same in Follinsby. And Jennifer Garner wasn't born in West Virginia, but she lived there for most of her childhood, before kicking ass on ABC's Alias, where her code name on missions was often Mountaineer. There are Americans whose ancestors have lived in the same state for centuries who do not always know as much about their states as I do. This is a fact. And it is also a fact that knowledge is not the marker of belonging in America that I want it to be. When congresswomen born and raised in the United States are being told to return to the places they came from on the basis of their skin color and their last names, I find myself questioning when, or whether, our country will ever see people who look like me, or my parents, or my child as American. In the absence of a body that knows how to effectively respond to racism, I wrap myself in my home shirt, with the state of West Virginia replacing the O, in much the same way that my mother wrapped herself in 6 yards of silken sari, or my father wrapped himself in the U.S. flag. As though fabric can protect us. As though fabric will make it impossible for angry men to see through the cloth to the skin below. No more trivia. I mean, I could make more trivia, but I have no more trivia, but I'm happy to take questions if you have them. Yeah?
Has Mr. Bradford read the book?
Mr. Bradford passed away about 15 years ago in an accident. But his kids have read the book. They read the story. And actually, when the story came out in the Bitter Southerner, which is this beautiful journal, if you haven't read it, it's an amazing, amazing magazine about radical life in the South, and when it came out, they actually made me a jersey with Heart and Hustle on it and sent it to me, and that was like really, really pretty lovely. Yeah.
So like it just strikes me just like all the vividness of the stories from a long time ago now, and I'm wondering if you have been thinking about these stories for a long. I mean, obviously they've been in you for so long, but like, how did they start coming out? And like, in terms of the writing process, was it sort of just stories in your mind that you had been thinking about, or maybe talking to people close to you, and then you decided to start just writing about them all, and they kind of just, because it's just so right there, as if they are happening right now as you're reading. That I'm like, what was the process of it all coming out for you?
I think that really around 2015 is when this all started to come together in my head, and I think it really was because in 2015 and 2016, the volume on the negative narrative about Appalachia just really got turned up. Like, there had always been a negative narrative about Appalachia. When I went to Pittsburgh, people made fun of me for being from West Virginia, and now Pittsburgh loves being part of Appalachia, and I think it's weird. Like, I don't know how that changed in 20 years, but it's changed. They now rep their Appalachianness, but I didn't know it when I lived in West Virginia, but the minute I moved to Pittsburgh, it became very clear that I was from a place that people had really negative and derogatory feelings about. I mean, people would say ridiculous things all the time. So I always knew that was there, and then it just felt like in the context of the 2016 election, the volume went so much higher. And there was this narrative of you would just they'd go to West Virginia and they'd interview one person and they'd be like, oh, Appalachia is all Trump voters, and somehow they're handing Trump the election, and it's like West Virginia and Kentucky have 6 electoral votes, guys. They're not handing anyone anything. We cannot put all the responsibility for this election on this one region of the country, and yet that's what was happening. And I think that growing up, a friend of mine who grew up with me said this to me. He said, I thought we had this really niche experience. I never thought anyone would even know we existed. Everyone's always this is so weird. You're this small, quirky group of people from West Virginia. He was I just thought we'd be a blip. But seeing this narrative become so prevalent and be so counter to what I knew about the place where I grew up and what I knew about people who lived there made me feel really angry. And I feel a lot of progressive New England people had a lot of crap to talk about Appalachia, and I would be in these conversations and I would just feel so angry and be hey, you really don't get it. You do not understand. But there wasn't anything to put up against hillbillyology and be no, read this instead, right? Or read these other things. And I didn't know, and there were books, it's not to say there weren't, but I didn't learn them when I was growing up either. That narrative wasn't shown to me as a kid in schools. So I think feeling the need for that narrative was really a big motivation, and then it just felt so important to ground it in that really specific, how can I expect you to understand where I'm from if you can't see it? So the first essay is you drive home, because if you can't see where I come from, then you're not going to understand anything about that place. So I'm going to make you drive with me, and we're going to take that drive, and you're going to see every piece of it as I see it. It just felt like there was a need to do that, to really ground people in the place and in the people who live there as a counter to this very dominant narrative that exists as Appalachia is white, it's conservative, it's Christian, it's male. It's a lot more than that, and I just think I think I'm ornery, and so that being the narrative made me want to do something different. Yeah.
Having read lots of your essays, I'm struck by can you hear me? personality to see both sides. I'm wondering if you could speak more to that ability.
I mean, I think that, like, if you were to count negative instances to positive instances, the positive, like, is so much more than the negative. Like, the negative is painful and very memorable, but I would say I was shown love 20 times for every time I was shown something different than that. And so I think that I hold that balance, right? Like, I know that the instances of racism I talk about are deeply painful, but I also have a whole catalog of amazing and wonderful things I can tell you about people who I grew up with and people who are part of raising me. I mean, I was really lucky. I grew up on a street that's like not. It's a magical place, Pamela Circle. It was a magical place. It's not magical anymore. Most of the people who live there don't live there anymore. But it really was a pretty amazing place where, yeah, I mean, I just like the ratio, just like school was really hard. But the minute I got home and I got to the street, like all of that went away. There just wasn't any of that. Nobody had any sideways things to say, and so that community is the community I kind of ground myself in, right? There were lots of people outside that community who had lots of negative things to say, but that's not home for me. Like, home for me is my street. Home for me is the Indian aunties and uncles and their families. Like, I can root myself in those people who make home for me, and also acknowledge that there were other people who are not home. But the positives that I have with those people in the community are just the thing I think ultimately is the place where I sort of try to ground myself. It's not always easy, and certainly I think the 2016 election put a lot of that into question again, because some of those people who were home have really shifted also in their beliefs. So I wouldn't say it's static either. I think it changes all the time. I think there are times when I feel closer or further away, but yeah, there's a lot of love there. Yeah. You're gonna have to like yell, I think.
I have a pretty unformed question. I'm also an immigrant who grew up in a household of immigrants. I'm wondering if it was your experience too that your parents came at a particular time, and I'm wondering if they experienced a stop in their own development because the culture that they came from was something that grew beyond them, that they weren't there anymore. And so that their practices, their beliefs, their approach to life kind of like froze in time. So I was wondering if that was also not just with the conservatism that you were facing with the white folks that but in the immigrant culture that you were also growing up in, was that also sort of ossified?
Yeah, I think that's very much the case, right? I think that for people who grew up in India in the 60s and 70s, or 50s and 60s, and then moved to the US, right, their understanding of Indian culture and traditions and norms was based on how they grew up. And then they came here, and they were raising us with those norms because those were the norms they knew. And those norms didn't really match with the norms of the society we were living in. I mean, I see this with my students, right? Where the disconnect between, like, this is a big thing that I talk with kids about, is like being raised by people who were raised in a different place is really hard because there's a whole set of expectations and understandings that don't align with here, and also probably don't align with there anymore either. But it's everyone's doing the best they can, right? And so they're trying to raise you with what they think are the most important parts of how they were raised. But I do think that's true. I think that. And I think there are like interestingly good things about it. There just are interesting things about it. I went to Trinidad a few years ago. Well, now a lot of years ago. And immigrants to Trinidad from India have been there for close to 100 years now. But if you go to like the temples, the Hindu temples in Trinidad, it's actually very traditional. Like in some ways, their practices are closer to 100 years ago in India than the practices of people in India now. So in some ways, I think there's this. There's kind of like a way in which the things that solidify sometimes prevent an evolution that can be a degrading evolution. And so I think there are just parts of it where I think my parents were able to hold on to things that are gone in India at this point, that I'm glad that they were able to hold on to because those things are now lost. So I think there's two sides there for sure.
either like talk, like how do you think about, you know, the part of the story of like Appalachia is like leaving it, right? And you know, living in places like Boston and or all over, and do you kind of think that could be part of the sort of like, it's almost like our job to like, if we're not there, to like keep telling those stories, like, because we probably won't go back, and that's probably like
We have a lot of guilt.
reasons. And, yeah.
Yeah, no, I think so. And I mean, I think actually part of this experience that's been so interesting is meeting so many ex-Appalachians, which you all probably don't know, but ex-Appalachian is a word. It's a real word. There are not ex-Californians, there are not ex-Floridians, but there are ex-Appalachians because I think it's an identity, right? Like, there is Appalachia is a really unique place, and there are cultural traditions and ways of being that you learn when you grow up there, that when you leave, you look around and you're like, oh, people are not, this is not the same. And so I think we carry that with us wherever we go. And I think there is a lot of guilt. I feel a lot of guilt. Like, I look at what's happening there right now, and I don't know what I would do because, I mean, the legislature wants to erase people who look like me, so I'm not really sure it's realistic to be like, I could go back there. I don't think I can. Laura would kill me, probably, if I was like, West Virginia from Boston and you're from New York. But I do think there is this way in which I think a lot of it's connected to hillbillyology. Again, I think a lot of us carry the pain of the negative narrative inside of us, but weren't necessarily. Something about that book, I think, made people want to fight back in a different way. Where it was like, it's not enough for us to just like have these conversations one-on-one with people, but like there actually needs to be a really significant collective pushback, because I think we saw writ large the damage, and I think the damage has been done for so long, right? There's a great documentary, if you get a chance to watch it, it's on Hulu. It's called Hillbilly. It's by a woman named Ashley York. It came out in like 2018, and she sort of argues that negative stereotypes about Appalachia have existed for a really long time because it allows for like the complete destruction of the environment, right? Like, you can take all of Appalachia's coal, you can take all of its natural gas, you can poison the water, you can dump chemicals in the water, you can do all those things because you've convinced people that people in Appalachia aren't people. They're not human. And that is something that we know as a pattern in our world. When you want to do bad things to people, you dehumanize them, and then you can do whatever you want. And so I think, like, that dehumanization, we're all experiencing, like, individually, or, like, seeing it in our communities and seeing how it's playing out, but seeing then what that dehumanization does on, like, such a massive scale, I think has created a much stronger impetus in people to, like, link arms together and, like, collectively push back. And I think the collective pushback is really exciting. I mean, there are some really awesome things happening in Appalachia right now. Really amazing progressive movements. West Virginia Can't Wait, Stephen Smith's organization, Paula Jean Swearingen running for Congress. Like, people are stepping up in lots of ways, but I think it's not enough people yet for it to be just something they can do by themselves. Like, I think we have to do it too. I think they need, like, there's an amplification that can happen that can be really important. So, yeah, definitely. Yeah, Calvin.
Did your parents pack your lunch to school? Did the kids say anything about what you ate?
Oh, you want me to tell you what I ate? Well,
Did kids have weird reactions?
yes, very weird reactions. And my mom can tell you, she tried really hard to, like, make things that I would eat or could eat that didn't get a weird reaction. And ultimately, I think I ate peanut butter and jelly for I can't eat it anymore because I ate it so much. But no, to make it worse, not only, yes, I tried to take Indian food to school, and that did not get a reaction. But also, my dad worked at a chemical plant, and my dad was thrifty. So at the plant, they had these biohazard bags, which were Ziploc bags that had like an orange skull and crossbones on them. And so that's what I had to take my lunch in. That was not enjoyable. That even got a reaction out of the peanut butter and jelly in the biohazard bag. So, but yes, if you've ever seen that Fresh Off the Boat episode where Eddie takes the noodles to school, that I had that experience for sure. And it's made me very sensitive about like heating up food, and like even at school, like when people would say things like, "Oh, that smells," like I just automatically am like already up here because I'm just so sensitive about those childhood experiences, and I feel like I ended up getting a microwave for my own classroom because I was like, I want to hear what anybody else has to say about what I'm eating. Like, I want to just eat my food. Young people are amazing. They're like, yo, your food is always seasoned. And I'm like, yes. It's seasoned. So, you trust kids, to be honest with you. Yeah.
Will you talk about your writing process, like working as a teacher and teaching kids about writing? How does that manifest in your own, and how do you find time for it?
Yeah, I'm gonna be really honest. There are all these people who are like, I wake up at 6 a.m. every day or 4 a.m. and I write for an hour. I'm not that person. I'm what I would call a binge writer, which is like I write in fits and spurts. And like if I'm writing, then I'm writing. And Laura can tell you it's like really hard to do anything with me because I'm just like I gotta write this whole thing right now. But then there'll be like really big gaps and fallow periods where like I'm not writing anything and I might be turning something over in my head again and again. But teaching is really all consuming, and like making the space in your brain to write is very, very, very hard. And so Saturday mornings, summer, like it's always like, where is there some space where my brain's a little bit clear? I think that also I took a lot of classes. Grub Street, which is a writing nonprofit in Boston, like I needed deadlines. I wasn't gonna do it if I didn't have them. And so I took, I think between 2015 and 19, like I took like 6 classes, and in each class I had to write 3 essays and get feedback on them and like workshop them. And that was a huge part of my process. Like it wasn't just, I'm so disciplined and I sit in my room by myself and I write. That's not me. And I don't think it's actually a lot of people. I think that's a narrative that people have, but I think many of us need more structure. And many of us need more like support and community around us to do it. So for me, it was Grove Street classes, and then I went to writers' workshops over the summer, and that would be like a week-long intensive each summer where, again, it was like, now you're just doing this, you're diving into this, and you're focusing on this. But I think something that I keep kind of marveling about in this is that like a lot of these essays were written the same year that BPS tried to close McCormick. And looking back, I'm kind of like, I don't know how that happened. I'm not sure what.
You're angry, that's how that happened.
Yeah. Anger is apparently a very good motivator for writing, is what you can learn from that. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm wondering about the linguistic diversity in, I guess, where you grew up, and if you could touch on the language loss that you suffered and what that would have meant to have that communicating with your family and extending that into your community.
I want to make sure I got your question. Like, speaking about linguistic diversity or the lack thereof and the impact it's had on my language skills. Yeah, I mean, I think my mom tried really hard. My mom's right here. She tried really, really hard. Like, she would try to get me to read and write in Gujarati. Like, in the summer, we'd be in the basement. She tried to have me do lessons. Like, she tried very hard, and I was a very bad student. So, like, I can read like a 4-year-old can read. Like, it's very, like, letter at a time, like, then try to put the letters together. And my spoken language, similarly, like, the only person I speak Gujarati with is my mom. My dad doesn't really speak in Gujarati as much anymore. My sister doesn't really speak it. My niece doesn't speak it. And so it is this very weird feeling of, like, knowing that even as my language skills are limited, like, they're just becoming more and more limited because the community of people who I can speak that language with is very small. And I think, where we grew up, like, there wasn't really there weren't enough of us to have it be more intentional than that. Like, you weren't going to have language schools for 5 or 6 kids, although I think they tried to figure things like that as a community to support us, but I do think that very much like the way that school thought about language was like, if you didn't speak English, you were at a deficit, right? Instead of thinking, oh, you already know one language, like, how amazing, we can just add another one on top of that, right? And I do think there are ways in which Gujarati, being the first language that I learned, has made it easier for me to learn other languages. Like, I speak Spanish very fluently. I understand and can speak a little bit of Cape Verdean Creole and, like, can fake my way through a little bit of conversation there, but I think it's because it's all hanging on those other languages Like I have enough schema in my mind to sort of be able to put language on top of other language. And I think a lot of the time we don't do that. We sort of assume you're at zero and you don't know anything and we need to teach you English. And I wish I'd been lucky enough to have an environment where people were building on my language skills, and I wish that our kids had that too. And I still don't think that's how we think about it. Yes, Sarah.
I think a lot of people in this room know you as an educator and as one whose sort of central tenets about how you create space for young people to learn is to build relationships with them. And you've written these stories, these essays in 2015. They've been a part of your life since you were, your earliest memory. To what extent have you shared parts of yourself over the course of the last 20 years with your students as a way of sort of building bridges and community with them?
I think initially, and especially a lot, like being the child of immigrants is a thing that I feel like is always a point of connection for me with students. Even like things like, I always put my shoes in a plastic bag before I put them in my suitcase or in my backpack, and anybody I see a lot of people who are children of immigrants nodding their heads right now, right? One, two, right? That's a thing. All my kids do it too, right? And it's like this, oh, I know you. Like, we come from the same place. We don't put our shoes with our clothes. We weren't raised that way. Like, and some of the stuff around just like parental expectations versus what you're navigating as a young person, like I feel like that I've been doing since I started teaching. I think that my queerness has been something that I've sort of shared in different ways starting later, but I was messaging with a former student today, Stephen Lee, who some of you know, and Stephen was, when he was in 8th grade, really trying to figure himself out and really having a hard time and really getting into lots of fights with our administration. So like I started to bribe him with books. I had like a box of gay boy books. They were like gay boy romances, and I kept them in my closet, and every time he got through a week without getting into an altercation with an administrator, I'd like give him a book, right? And this is like stuff that would get me fired in Florida. But like I think that sort of like started with those personal connections, and more I feel like it's not even just the individual connections, but really talking about, especially in the context of like a class like ethnic studies, if we're going to talk about intersectionality, I'm going to put my identity out there first. I have to share those things first. So I feel like it's become more and more pressing to like be really transparent with young people about all the parts of me as they make sense of who they are. Yeah.
Going back to language, I'm just curious, from the West Virginia point of view, how much of your West Virginia language have you censored or lost or tried to intentionally hold on to moving from, Appalachia to New England? Like, I used to say like gummin and spigot and
Oh my God, you're taking me back to Pittsburgh.
yeah, and
Slippy.
Then like Slippy or Nebby, Jeremy's right Nebby. Then I find then my kids will be like,
That for me really happened when I went to college, where like people were mean. Like, we don't say to be in West Virginia, you say something needs washed, right? You know what I'm saying? And like I really vividly remember one of the girls in my dorm being like, you're saying that wrong. Like, that's not how you talk, right? And so I think college was a really big adjustment for me. It was really hard. I felt like I didn't know what I was doing. Like, it was horrible. Like my freshman year, I just really struggled with feeling like I was a fish out of water all the time. And then people were really explicitly saying that to me. And so I think I started to censor and erase a lot early. To the extent that like now, I feel like you only hear it if I'm talking to somebody else who speaks the same way. And then I'll fall into it. But by and large, it's gone. I lost it. And I think I lost it because people were so terrible about it. And made it seem like, well, if you talk that way, like you're ignorant and you're uneducated and like you're in college now, you can't talk those ways. So yeah, I think that's an experience that a lot of people have when they first leave Appalachia, is this sense of it's language lost in it's very similar, right? It's this deficit mentality, not like, oh, you can speak this way and this way, but instead, oh, this thing that you're doing is all wrong, so get rid of it and put this in its place. there are many, many, many overlaps between Appalachian and immigrant experience, believe it or not. I think people who leave Appalachia do experience some of those things in the way that immigrants do also, I think, because there are such deep cultural differences sometimes. Any other questions? Yeah?
Since these essays, some of which have appeared in separate publications, now that it's a book, has anything about the process of it being like a thing that's out in the world surprised you?
I have been surprised by how many other brown people there were in Appalachia who I didn't know about. Because like every other day I feel like I get a message from someone who was like, I grew up in Logan, I grew up in Tug Fork, and I'm like, okay, I didn't know you were there, but I'm really glad to know you were there, and that's awesome that you read this book and are excited about it. So that, yeah, I mean, I think I was like hyper focused on the Charleston area because that's where we lived, and I don't think I totally processed that there were potentially also immigrant communities in other parts of West Virginia, but that has been a surprising thing. And then like a really lovely surprising thing also I would say has just been like the very visible and vocal queer community in Appalachia that did not exist when I was a kid growing up, but that very much exists now and is just so excited about this book and like so excited to see it in the world, and are like, you know, it's just, I think I've been saying, I think I feel in some ways closer to home now than I have in a really long time because these are new relationships that are forming. Like there are people who I'm really excited to see when I go to Kentucky, and there are, you know, like, and those are new emerging relationships with that place and with people there in a way that like in a lot of ways so many of the people who I grew up with have left. So like if I was relying on those relationships, the connection would just erode. But there's this been new reconnecting that's been really, really lovely. And I didn't expect it. Like I didn't know what was gonna happen, but I would say I didn't expect it. Yeah?
Were there any significant books or authors that you looked up to when you were younger?
Oh, that's a great question. I was just talking before people came in about an amazing writer named Cynthia Rylant, who is from Appalachia, and she has a beautiful, beautiful book called When I Was Young in the Mountains that I loved a lot when I was growing up. She's an amazing writer, a young adult writer, and she still writes books now. She's got a ton of different books. So her for sure. I mean, our library when I was growing up was like the size of from the chairs. What do you think, Mom? From the chairs to the wall. Like we had something called a pop-up library. That apparently was a thing in the 60s and 70s where they would just like, they were like little octagon shaped sheds. Yeah, it was a shed, and then they put carpet in it and a water fountain and some shelves and some really cold air conditioning. And the library was a shed, and then of the shed, like one wall was the young adult section. And I read every book. A lot of times. So there are just books I read again and again. Like I read the Little House on the Prairie series probably like 900 times. Yeah, so there weren't a lot of books, but the ones that were there I read many times and I loved a lot. But I would say Cynthia Rylant is somebody for me who I just, yeah, you should read When I Was Young in the Mountains. It's beautiful. Yeah.
You have such a like appreciation for Appalachian culture and just like the uniqueness and specialness of the place now, and the people. Did you have like? Do you think as a kid you understood that? You know, you talk about your street and stuff. Did you know it was so special and that you had this special community?
Yeah, I did. I was like my family when they would come from India, like they would like kind of make fun of me. They said I was like I worshipped my street. Like I really did. I lived on the street. Like I wouldn't come home until like I had to come home to eat dinner. I was weird. Like I would like sit on the porch with like the 60-year-old men who were like talking about things I had no idea what they were talking about. And I would just sit there with them and like listen. I don't know what I was doing. I was planning to write a book apparently. So yes, I think from really early, like I knew it was a really, really special place and that the people there were just really different, like really special people. I mean, it was like it was just such a loving place, and like there were things that like talk about, and like, you know, like one of my neighbors knew my dad loved figs, and he planted a fig tree for my dad, right? It was that kind of place. Like, it's really hard to find places like that. Just my mom had an accident and fell on our steps, and it was because of the tree, and like she wasn't even back from the hospital before a neighbor had come over with his truck and like torn the trees out. Like, it was like that kind. I was like, did we know the trees were going? I don't know, but they're gone now. It was that kind of place. Like people, there's this really interesting. It's a concept that doesn't exist in New England. So there's this notion of the kinship economy that people talk about in Appalachia, which is like effectively that you look for the gaps. Like, you look for them, and you're always looking for, like, where's the gap in somebody else's life, and, like, do you have something that can fill it? Do you have something to offer? Even if you don't have a lot, if you have something, you're going to offer it, because that's how people operate with each other. And it's not your family necessarily or your blood related, but it's just, like, we're in community with each other. In rural places, there's not anything else to rely on. There's not infrastructure. Like, the ambulance is not coming. Or if it gets there, it's going to be too late. So you're going to look for how you can take care of each other. You feel that when you're in it. You know, it's not something that you sort of like only realize later. You definitely know when you're in it that like what's happening is something really special. Yeah.
So my mom, who's from Puerto Rico, she claims that that there's like a special connection between people from islands, and you know she can connect with people differently, like whether they're from Taiwan to Ireland to the Caribbean. I wonder if there's something like that about mountain place.
Mountain people? Yeah, well, actually, one interesting thing is that at the last reading, there was someone from Appalachia and there was someone from Puerto Rico, and they saw a lot in common with each other. The woman from Appalachia was talking about her guilt over leaving, and the woman from Puerto Rico was like, oh, I also have that guilt, and I didn't know that was a guilt we could share. So I think there might be a shared experience of that. I think mountain people, for sure, it's hard to not be humble when you're from the mountains, because when you look around, you're just always reminded of how small you are. Because it's just like really old, really giant things are around you that have been around for so long. I find that humility lacking on the coast. We need some mountains, you know, to like remind people we're not that important. We're smaller than we think we are. So yeah, I do think there is sort of like a humility, and again, I think that reliance around like recognizing it and relying on people who are around you, and that being sort of like the basis of how you understand relationships is like these are the like relationships that sustain me, and that's like where I'm putting my energy, for sure. I also think people move slower, and take more time, and like it just doesn't move as fast. Like it takes longer to get places, so you spend longer when you get there, and you're not in a hurry to go, and you're just gonna take your time and go slow. Laura always used to say when we go to West Virginia, she's like, what do people do here, right? Like, what is there to do? And it's like, well, the doing is being with people. That's all it is. You're going to go sit at someone's house, or they're going to sit at your house, and you're going to have a meal, or you're just going to sit, and you're going to talk, and like that is the doing. That thing, I think, is something that people share in common when they come from mountain places. All right, cool. I think we're about done. If there's one more question, I can try to answer it. I can just say thank you all for coming. All right, well, thank you so much for coming. If you have a book that you brought with you, I'm happy to sign it. If you don't, then we will figure out how we're going to get you your book. But I'm super happy to sign books if you have.
Amy, I look for you every time.